Hello everybody and welcome back to Kerbal Space Program for what promises to be the final episode of this particular series, but don't despair, Kerbal Space Program will be back, although I don't yet know in what form, and this series will continue into Stellaris, starting tomorrow, as a continuation of the Ethiopia Through The Ages series. So let's go ahead and get this dock up happening here. Let's make sure that we are controlling from here. Okay, we do appear to be fantastic. SAS on, we just came around into the light side here, which is perfect. And I did move us in a little bit closer right when we got there, because we had drifted apart a little ways. But let's just go ahead and point right at that target, and hope that this doesn't start wiggling too much. That's a pretty big wiggle there. I'm going to turn off this reaction wheel. In fact, I'm just going to put it on pilot only. And we'll see if that can smooth things out a bit and freeze the physics there briefly, but we'll call that good for now. And let's just slowly make our way in. We do have probe control, which is slightly shocking. I'm going to rotate us to line up slightly better here. Point at that target. And we're just going to have to go for it. Go to like 0.1 meters per second. Actually, I'm going to go to like 0.2 meters per second. Okay. As you can see here, it was a close thing. I say close. We have over a kilometer per second of xenon left. But we burned almost all of our xenon to get here. So that is absolutely wonderful. Let's get this docked up and the Jool station completed. This is looking solid. We have no RCS on this, so we can't re-aim this. If we have to re-aim it, we'll just have to rerun this. But it looks like we're good. Fantastic. As expected, that was pretty much ready right away. This angle is slightly weird, but we'll call that good. So we're going to hop back to the Space Center, and let's take a real quick retrospective on what all we did this series. It was a lot. It was a whole lot. There were a few things that we learned as well. So our first little while, of course, we were working on building up science, and let's hop into the VAB to take a quick look at that. I believe that these are sorted in alphabetical order, which isn't super useful, if I'm honest, but let's go ahead and see here. Yeah, this is pretty alphabetical, unless there's a way to change that, but I don't think so. So we are just going to look for some of these that are like the Free India Mark 1. Oh, look at that bad boy. I believe this was our first orbital rocket, the one that killed Jeb on re-entry. Mostly because we came in just a wee bit too fast. Tends to happen. Of course, that was just a technological issue, and over time, the Free India lander ended up morphing into this heavy lifter, which looks to me like this is intended to be like a moon orbiter or something like that. There's not a whole lot learned from these early things, though. The first thing that really stands out in my mind as something that I learned a lot from would be the Minmus base. Up until there, everything else was pretty much a rehash of things I've done before. The Minmus base represented something a little bit different, and let's just hop over to that quick. The reason it represented something a little bit different was because it was a landing platform on which the intention, anyway, was that we would land craft. That ended up not working for the simple fact that craft self-collision is not a thing. This is the wrong location. Well, that's also something that we did while learning how to build this base. So let's just go ahead and switch over to the fuel hauler. Perfect. This is where we want to go, and this isn't exactly daytime right now, but it should be fine. We should be able to see absolutely no problem. In theory. There we go. Fantastic. So, I mean, we can warp this until daytime. That's not a big deal. There we go. Fantastic. We've got Kerbal in the background there. Wonderful. So, of course, we've got this ship docked up here, and the original idea was that we would land the ship on here, and we still pretend that we land the ship on here, of course. But in all actuality, that's not exactly true, because there's no ship self-collision. But overall, that's the thing that we learned while making this. We also learned how the Kerbal construction system works, and it works pretty well. It's kind of finicky, to be sure. There are some things we couldn't really do, like have this relay antenna be placed up here, which was something I wanted to do, but we ended up having to pass on that one. But of course, this system was put in place so that we could do bigger and better things with refueling missions over Minmus. So naturally, we never once refueled anything over Minmus, I don't think. Did we refuel one thing over Minmus? We might have refueled one thing over Minmus. Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. So that was, you know, exciting, but I always enjoy building refueling stations that are self-sufficient, and this one was no different. This one was a step above the others, of course, and that is absolutely wonderful. But after that, we had a very, very, very long detour, wherein we didn't really achieve anything that we set out to achieve based on our initial goals. The entire Eve mission was kind of out of scope. And I was thinking that while I was doing it. I was just like, I mean, we're almost done though. And then we weren't. We weren't. We weren't almost done. We were nowhere near almost done. That took a very long time. But, I mean, if you look at the things that were designed out of it, this is insane. Like, this is perhaps the most insane thing I've ever made right here. And the fact that it didn't do a single staging event. It did require a refuel, but it didn't do a single staging event until ascending from Eve is bonkers. Absolutely crazy. Like, I can't overstate how insane that is. That this thing didn't have a single staging event until taking off from Eve. And I definitely learned a lot about aerobraking in the Eve atmosphere and how not to do it. That's definitely a thing I learned. You don't want to dip in too far, because if you do, bad things will happen. The Eve atmosphere gets real thick, real quick. You just gotta be careful. Only go in 5 or 10 kilometers if you're looking to aerobrake. Even 10 kilometers is a lot if you're looking to aerobrake. You're probably not coming back out at that altitude. So, of course, we made this thing, and it's insane. And it actually worked. Mostly. And I say mostly because we ran into a physics issue with some of our side components here. So, of course, we have the Eve Mission Alpha, which is this. Was this made because we had a Kerbal miss the alarm? I'm guessing this was made because we had a Kerbal miss the alarm, and we had to bring the Kerbal up there. Okay, so then we had the Eve Mission Beta, which is this. This, I don't think we ever actually sent up. This was planned, but we ended up scrapping because it was too big to fit into a fairing, and there was no way I was going to try to drop this thing through Eve's atmosphere. Now, it probably would have done a pretty good job if we could have somehow gotten it to the surface. And that's a big, big if. So we ended up abandoning this concept here. And then we went for the Eve Module Charlie. The Eve Module Charlie is this kind of wacky looking rocket with the really wide fairing on it. If we go inside of that fairing, we have our science rover. This was the rover that collected all of the science for us. This arm was mounted too low and could not be utilized, but everything else worked fine, with the exception of the docking port, which broke off on re-entry. But that is okay. So we were fine there, and then we also had the deployable rover, This rover's mission was, of course, to bring our deployable science to the surface and locate it close enough to our landing site that we could set ourselves up a surface outpost. And this rover worked flawlessly. There was not any problem with this at all. It was completely good. And then there was the mining module. So this module had issues. Mostly its issues were a result of physics bugs. When we docked it up, it had a tendency to randomly jerk around, like completely randomly. And it was just not particularly effective. I ended up cheating because it was a physics bug, and we had the systems in place to refuel. But this didn't work as well as I had hoped. Mostly because there were some pretty major physics bugs with the actual dock up. So that was definitely a lesson learned. Under the current physics system, don't try to do this. But this is, of course, not the entirety of the Eve mission. We also had... where is it? Well, we had a variant of the mining module that landed on Gilly. I don't know that we actually saved it exactly. I don't think we did. We had a variant of it that landed on Gilly, and that worked much better on Gilly than on Eve. Those physics jerks appear to be related to the gravity in some way, and on Gilly it's not so bad. And we also, of course, had a fuel hauler for the Eve mission, and I'm not sure where exactly in this that would be. This is the Eve station that I actually don't even remember putting up there, but apparently we did. And of course, this is a restock bug right here. That'll hopefully get fixed before the next season. And we will go ahead and go back into here. We do still have the probe launcher to talk about. Now this thing, its mission was to scout out a landing site for us, and it did a magnificent job at it. It almost didn't. Mostly through my own incompetence, but in the end, we did finally figure out a good landing spot. We were able to survey one, and we were able to use it to great effect. This probe launcher did its job. It was fairly expensive at the time, but it got there, and it did what it needed to do. So that was absolutely fantastic. We learned a lot using just the probe launcher on how to do the re-entry. That was a huge part of that. Ah, here we go, the Gilly Eve fuel transit. This is, of course, the one that lands on Gilly with these rather ridiculous landing legs. You'll notice that if we extend them, they extend in an awkward direction. That is, of course, because they have this hinge on them that is intended to create less drag on ascent. So we can bring them up like this, and when they land in vacuum, they'll land with a much broader base for the low Gilly gravity. And ultimately, this worked completely fine. There was not really an issue with this at all. So that worked very well. And then it comes to what we did after that, which honestly feels like so recent. But after that... oh yeah, the Totally a Good Idea Mark 1. Oh... yeah, this is totally a good idea. I believe this is the one that claimed Jeb's life. This is a terrible idea. There's not really a good way to slow this thing down. Maybe we'll fly this again, though, at the end of this, and see if we're able to properly land this without modifications. That would be interesting to see. Yeah, I think we'll go ahead and do that. For now, though, I want to talk about the solar station. Actually, there's nothing really to talk about with that. That just worked. It took a long time because we had to do that really long rendezvous maneuver. And in that time, of course, we started working on the Jool outpost, and we worked on the corvette. So let's hop out of here for now, and let's talk quick about our space planes. Now, I definitely learned a lot about how space planes operate in this game. I feel much more confident in them as of now than when I started the Corvette project. It took a while to develop the Corvettes and the Jool gas scoopers. Ultimately, the Corvettes are fine. I don't think there's any fundamental problem with the Corvettes other than they're I wouldn't call them super short range. They're kind of short range, at least in comparison to, like, the gas scoopers. Those are super long range. And this does require rocket-assisted takeoff, so there's that as well. Now, in retrospect, I may have wanted to run some, like, whiplashes here instead, but really, I think that would overcomplicate this at this point. And I think the Corvette is completely fine now. It can also get refueled with just liquid fuel for those atomic rocket motors once it gets in space. And it does have some small photovoltaic panels. It's not intended to be the same way as the gas scooper, which ultimately the problem with the gas scooper, if we load that up, the problem with this guy was always going to be power generation out at Jool. There just aren't good options for power generation at Jool. But we got it to the point where it reliably takes off, even with this ridiculous setup back here. Getting this thing into orbit was bonkers. Absolutely insane to get this thing going. It was a lot of development, and we probably could have used more thrust on this because, or rather, not more thrust, we could have used more lift on this, because really the amount of thrust that we're using to get this thing off the ground is kind of ridiculous. But once we get going, it's completely fine. But like I said, this was always going to have a power issue out at Jool, and it definitely did. There was a big power issue out at Jool, and just generally a thrust-to-weight issue, but once we actually got docked up, which we now are, to the Jool station, it's not a big deal. We just dip down into the atmosphere a little bit, and then raise our periapsis back up once we're out of the atmosphere, and dock back up. It's not a huge deal. Of course, creating xenon out at that station is just a fiction that I came up with as a reason for that station to exist. So overall, I do think that we probably should have had a little bit more lift on this thing. We could have gotten away with possibly less fuel or something like that. I'm not claiming this is an efficient design. I'm merely claiming that it works. And it's dumb. I'm also claiming that. It is a dumb design. But a hilarious one. And I'm pretty happy about that. So that's a bit of a retrospective on the things that we've done. Man, when I go through it like that, it kind of feels like I didn't do much. But we also very much did. Like, the R&D that went into that Eve mission was insane. Absolutely crazy. But I think I'm going to end this series with, like I said, a second flight of the totally a good idea. Let's give this another go, knowing that we failed previously, but it was so long ago that I don't remember exactly what went wrong, other than we came in too fast. How much DV does this thing have? About 3K. Okay. Well, let's do it. We're going to put Jeb in here again. Oh, Jeb isn't here. I guess Valentina's going to have to drive it. I'm going to make no modifications to this thing. This is a swivel engine. Okay, we're going to launch this and see if I can land it. We do have a parachute on here. That's a good sign. Unfortunately, it's not a drogue chute. Do we have a heat shield on this thing? I don't think we have a heat shield. That means we're going to have to do a lot of aero braking on the way in. The real question is, are we going to orbit, or is this a suborbital craft? Honestly, with having only around 3,000 DV, I feel like this is probably suborbital. But we'll just have to see. We'll have to see. Have I improved? Well, I mean, I wasn't bad at the game when we started, in my opinion. I was a little rusty at it, sure. I hadn't played it for a while, but I don't think I've improved all that much, realistically. At least in terms of my actual flying skills, I feel like my design has gotten better, but I was so technologically limited at this point that it's not exactly fair. So, Valentina, are you ready to see if you survive? Valentina is ready to see if she survives. Off we go. This time we are going to keep the thrust to weight a little bit lower. We're going to try to hold it at about that sweet spot of 1.6, somewhere around there, which is something that I definitely remember that I did not do previously. And let's go ahead and hop into orbital mode here and begin doing a turn. Feels weird to be piloting a rocket that's this early at this point, but I like it. I like it. We do need to continue throttling down here. And we're going to throttle back up to full fairly soon. We're just holding here for the time being. And yeah, I know our thrust to weight is up right now, but let's go ahead and throttle up to full now. Okay. We're just going to head on over here. We can definitely see that our thrust to weight is coming up nicely. Are we going to make it orbital? Well, that's the question. I have no idea if this thing's going to make orbit. Maybe, actually. You know, now that I look at this thing's going to make orbit, I think. Or close to it. Very close to it. We're going to stop at about 75. Yeah, we're getting some plasma here. Okay. There we go. We do have access to maneuver nodes, and so we'll go ahead and utilize those. And that's a little spicy. Yeah, I guess that's not quite going to be orbital. Well, we're going to go as... Well, I can do that, I suppose. That's something I often do. I apologize for that. Okay, let's go ahead and get this thing moving. We're going to... Valentina isn't skilled enough to make it over to here. That's insane to me. We're going to just go ahead and physics warp up to space here. And we'll be in space now. And that actually does give us just enough to squeak into orbit. Okay. Burn time of 29 seconds, so at T minus 14.5 seconds, we will go ahead and burn this. Let's warp forward a little bit towards that. I've overshot. Perfect. What could possibly go wrong with this? Actually, it's probably fine. So we do want to go orbital here. That is for sure. And have just enough to squeak our way back into the atmosphere. Which it looks like we will have just enough. Okay. Periapsis. Actually, our apoapsis is skyrocketing right now. I'm going to do that. We're going to go to prograde. And at this point, we are on our way back down. We're going to go to radial out, I guess. I don't like going radial out here. Our delta V is low, to be sure. But we are pushing our apoapsis too high right now. And that's because I burned late. Okay. Something a bit more like that. And let's pop over to prograde. We only have 54 meters per second here. We're going to have to be very careful. We may have to get out and push. That's okay if we do. Ooh, that's close. That's really close. But we don't have the delta V. We're going to have to warp around to here. We are going to dip into the atmosphere extremely briefly here. We're not quite in orbit. So we're going to dip down. That's fine. We only have 10 meters per second here. Keep that in mind. So we are going to have to get out and push. I think there's no way around that. Which is, I think, not an option that we had in the early game. So that's the thing. This all came about because I burned late, so I continue to be incompetent. That's not a shock. We're going to be in this atmosphere for actually quite a while. Periapsis is in another 40 seconds. So that's fine. I mean, our apoapsis dropping here isn't necessarily the worst. Technically, we may not have to get out and push if we want to take multiple aerobrake passes, but that's going to be extremely inefficient. Like, incredibly inefficient. So we just need to go up another kilometer here. And that'll be fine. Just another 700 meters until we're back out of the Atmo. Now, to be clear, I do kind of expect this to be a failure. Just throwing that out there. 69.9 and 70. Okay, so we're going to warp to the apoapsis here. And we're going to be prograde. Do we have power? We do have power. That's good. We're not really utilizing it, which is fine. We're going to try to do a very minimal burn here. I mean, we've got 10 meters per second, so incredibly minimal. We definitely wasted some power. There's no doubt about it. But this just goes to show how thin the margins were on this. Okay. That's in orbit, right there. Okay, so we're going to complete an orbit here. So this is a proper full orbit with this ship. And we still have Delta V remaining. So that is wonderful. We're going to pop around to the apoapsis over here. And we are going to point retrograde. There we go. And we're going to warp closer to the apoapsis. About... Oh, we might as well grab our mystery goo observation, I suppose. Can't close those doors? Sure. So we'll just do that. And that pushed us down 10 kilometers at the periapsis. Just that tiny little burn. Okay. So we're going to try to blow off as much speed as we can here. I'm not going to get out and push, actually. I've decided against it. Reason being, we didn't have access to that at that time. That requires an upgrade of the astronaut complex. So we're going to go ahead and do this the old-fashioned way. Bringing it on around, this is going to be about retrograde when we enter the Atmo, but that's fine. We want to go back out to radial. And our goal right now is to simply bleed as much speed as we can, using as much surface area as we can here. So you can see here, our apoapsis here is dropping. Now, I am expecting, I think, that we'll have to take a second aerobrake pass. Actually, I'm no longer expecting that. Just looking at the way this is going. This is a single aerobrake pass. Okay, we're going to hold this attitude until our apoapsis is 70 kilometers or below. And that won't be very much longer. Our apoapsis is currently down to 76, 75, 74, 73, 72, 71... We ain't coming back. So now we want to spend as much time in the atmosphere as possible. That is now our goal. We have no way to detach this. We may need to have Valentina bail and use her parachute. I don't know. I don't know what our final speed is going to be with this parachute, but our only goal here is to have Valentina survive this re-entry. There's nothing else we can do other than deploy this parachute, and it's rather unsafe right now. Rather unsafe indeed. Our apoapsis is now officially below 70. Now, we're not coming back. So now we just want to remove as much speed as possible from the equation. You'll note that we're coming in very shallowly. That's by design. Through the benefit of hindsight, I know that we want to come in very shallowly with this. Through the power of hindsight, I guess. So yeah, our time to periapsis is still decreasing right now. So we are going to be, I think we're going to be landing in the dark side of the the world here of Kerbin. I wanted to call it something other than Kerbin, and I was kind of struggling because at first I was like, the dark side of the Earth? That would be the way I would say it in like real world terms, but this isn't the Earth, this is Kerbin. The dark side of the Kerbin doesn't sound right. I don't know. The dark side of Kerbin isn't really what I'm going for here. I don't know. Words are hard. Words are very, very hard. We're at periapsis now, and we're starting to go back up, but we will not be exiting the atmosphere. So you can see here how quickly the apoapsis is coming down towards us. And that is fully expected. We're losing a lot of speed right now. We can't speed this return up if we wanted to, though. Normally, under most circumstances, I would be considering a re-entry burn right now to bleed off some of this speed, but we don't have that option. You know what? Since we're going up towards the apoapsis, I'm going to actually do this, which will increase our drag dramatically. Look at how quickly the apoapsis is coming down. Once we reach apoapsis, then we're going to go back to retrograde. Okay, we see a thermometer. We're going back to retrograde anyway. Excellent. That definitely increased our drag by a large amount. However, we have to remember our electric charge is decreasing, and we can't really do that for too much longer. So here we go. We are falling again. And our periapsis is now down to 33 kilometers. You can see here that our orbital speed is increasing, which is to be expected considering we just passed apoapsis. We're still up in some very thin atmosphere here. But at least we've got the benefit of 4x time acceleration and not actually caring what happens to Valentina. Fantastic. So our periapsis is currently down to 32 kilometers. That's great. We want to start dipping down into the 30s. Although, down into the 20s at these speeds is maybe a little sketch. You can start to see some plasma developing here. We ain't coming back. We already knew that. The question is, how much speed can we bleed off with the atmosphere before we get to the ground? That is indeed the question. I guess we'll find out. What's our surface velocity? Still increasing. Great. I mean, we're still quite high up. There's no doubt about that. And if we start seeing some of these things burn out down here, that's fine. We're essentially using these as ablative heat shields right now. That's kind of their only purpose in life right now. Protect the Valentina at all costs. Although it may not be possible to protect her forever. I mean, this re-entry trajectory isn't that energetic, but we have very little means to reduce our speed. Yep, we're not surprised that we're starting to see this thermometer here. Okay, I'm going to take us out of physics warp at this point. We don't want to lose attitude. We have used 4/5 of our electric charge, but we're not really using much to maintain this attitude right now because we're so long and cylindrical. Flipping is going to be exceptionally difficult at this time. Which is good. This is exactly the direction we want to be facing right now. We are still increasing in speed here. We are 7 minutes away from the periapsis here, but you can see how long it's taking to reduce the time to the periapsis. That's going to start going up soon. Quite soon. And when that happens, we are expecting this to start going down. We're not there yet. Just a lot of aerobraking, and I would be a lot less cautious with this aerobraking if we had a heat shield and a way to detach this. Of course we don't. We didn't have that technology at this time. And really, we wouldn't be able to use Valentina's EVA parachute back in the day either. Back in those first couple of episodes. So we'll just see if Valentina succeeds where Jeb failed. We're now officially in flight mode. Our apoapsis has dropped below 50 kilometers. We are actually going to be coming in on the lit side of Kerbin, which is a little bit strange, to be sure. Is that the moon? It is the moon. Hello, moon. Fantastic. Oh, hello. Look at this. That's still going up. This is basically... Oh, this is increasing now. Time to reach the periapsis is now increasing. Unfortunately, our aerial speed is also still increasing. We have dropped a little bit of electric charge just now, but that's fine. We're doing fine, in theory. And if we had come in at like 30 kilometers or 40 kilometers, as I often would have done instead, this definitely would have gone faster, but we just simply can't do that. We didn't have the Delta V, for one thing, because I burned at the wrong time, but it was recoverable. Now let's see if the landing is recoverable. We only had 9 Delta V to get this insertion, I'll remind you. 9 Delta V. In meters per second, that is. 9 meters per second Delta V. This thermometer has kind of stalled out. Okay. In orbital speed, our orbital speed is decreasing. That's good. We're at about 32 kilometers right now. We need to drop a lot more orbital speed before we start dropping further. Wow, that's actually lovely with those mountains there and the sunrise. That's really neat. I like that. That is absolutely fantastic. As we're passing over the Terminator. Yeah. Real nice there. Our periapsis is currently 10 kilometers. I mean, we're still 30 kilometers above the surface here. We are going to be seeing this swivel engine go away pretty soon. I think. The atmosphere continues to thicken up, and we are dropping speed now at a decent clip. So, periapsis is going to be at the surface momentarily. And I'm not sure if we could have had a less energetic... Well, we could have technically had a slightly less energetic insert here into the atmosphere. We could have dropped our apoapsis by like 14 kilometers. But realistically, that was only like 10 meters per second. So this is almost as non-energetic of a re-entry as we could have possibly done. Almost. Lots of air between us and the ground. And I guess we'll see if it's good enough. So this engine is going to blow up quite soon. We do expect that, and we've always expected that. This is, at this point, an ablative heat shield, of course. Still moving at over 2,300 meters per second. I'd like to point out, at 25 kilometers. Technically 22 in radar altitude. Now our apoapsis is also dropping. There goes that engine. Ooh, that created a tumble. That's not how aerodynamics works. I'd just like to point that out. That is not how aerodynamics works. But okay. That did bleed off a lot of speed. I mean, we're basically out of electric charge here, so... It did bleed off a whole lot of speed. Unfortunately, it also bled off our parachute. Well, rip Valentina. I suppose we could try to have her EVA and see if we can get that to happen. We're basically out of electric charge right now, and we're coming in nose first. I really don't believe that in reality that engine burning off like that would have flipped us around. I think that the aerodynamic forces at that speed would have kept us in the same aerodynamic envelope, but whatever. Now, there goes our actual pod. I'm not shocked by that. So ultimately, I kind of feel like it's not, without a little bit more fuel, or drogue chutes perhaps, or, well, decouplers would have done the trick. I feel like it's probably possible under exactly the right circumstances, right? And I was always expecting this to end in an explosion, by the way. But I feel like it's not possible under non-optimal circumstances to bring that particular rocket back without a decoupler. So the way, of course, that we would fix that, if we just... it doesn't matter if we revert. We're done with the series. But if we just revert that back to the vehicle assembly here, the way to fix that would have been to simply do this. And we didn't have this technology when this was designed. We didn't have the science for it. We put in a heat shield there, and we put in a... not one of these. A TD12 decoupler. One of these guys. That is recoverable. Now, to be clear, again, I do believe that under ideal situations, it is possible to recover this. So don't go make it yourself and then recover it and then be like, see, it's possible. No, it's totally possible. You just have to have the right conditions. And neither launch there did we have the right conditions, in my opinion. You have to launch it correctly, into the correct orbit, and ideally have enough delta V for a re-entry burn of at least some description, or to have a heat shield to bring in the capsule only. The capsule will decelerate far faster in the atmosphere than all of this. So there we go. And that is what I'm going to call the end of the Kerbal Space Program era of Ethiopia Through the Ages. But as I said at the beginning of the episode, do not despair. This is not the end of Kerbal Space Program on this channel. I don't yet know what form additional Kerbal will take, but it will be back. In this slot, starting tomorrow, Ethiopia will take to the stars in Stellaris. Now, we're probably going to have to regenerate our starting area, and it'll be a little bit different than the one that we generated at the beginning of this, because I wasn't anticipating this to take as long as it did. Thanks, Eve sidetrack. But, yeah, we're going to want to regenerate the galaxy. There's been a lot of changes in Stellaris since we did that, so that's definitely something that we're going to want to do. You can leave your offerings to the engagement gods in the form of likes, comments, subscribes, and bell ringings, and I will see you all next time in Stellaris.